What will you remember first of all if you are asked what unexpected find you have made? Someone will say that they found an old sock under the sofa 12 years later. Someone may have found a purse full of money and so on. But that's not the point. It was a surprise for me to find old letters from my wife's lover. That's when I was afraid for my marriage. I was in the basement working on completing the recreation room I had promised my 15-year-old daughter, Janet. The ceiling and walls were already finished, and I had enclosed the section under the stairs for additional storage. Now I was laying down the indoor-outdoor carpet I had brought home the previous night. With my wife Jamie visiting her mother in Cleveland and Janet staying over at a friend's house, I had the whole house to myself. I had spoken with the friend's mother, who assured me they would be home all the time, so I wasn't worried. Reflecting on Sunday night, before Jamie left, she was upset with me as usual and wouldn't discuss her trip. She simply said she needed time alone and would be gone for 2 weeks. Jamie hadn't been working since she was laid off from the bank 2 years ago, but with my good income, there was no pressure for her to find a job immediately. I had hoped her time off would help her relax and perhaps mend the rifts in our marriage, but so far it hadn't made much of a difference. My name is Jim Schwan. I'm 50 years old, and I'm a partner at Harris, Schwan & Wilson Attorneys. Joe Harris and I established the firm here in St. Louis nearly 20 years ago, and Margaret Wilson joined us 5 years later. Our focus is on corporate law, and our practice has been thriving. I haven't been actively involved in court proceedings much lately, as we have a talented team of young lawyers who are eager to prove themselves and contribute to our firm. They all aspire to become partners, although we've only added 1 or 2 in the past 17 years. Despite the slim chances, they strive even harder, as lawyers tend to do when faced with obstacles. I provide mentorship, guiding them through the complexities of corporate legal matters, and then empower them to take charge. Margaret leads the legal practice and is exceptionally skilled, effectively utilizing their abilities. Despite being driven hard, they appear content with their tenure at our firm, which undoubtedly enhances their professional credentials. Jamie and I got married 19 years ago, marking the second marriage for both of us. Together we have a daughter named Janet. My first wife passed away in a car accident, and although we didn't have any children together, Jamie had a son from her previous marriage who is now 24. He lived with his father after the divorce. He's now married with children of his own, and while Jamie occasionally spoke with him on the phone, as far as I know, she never visited them. She avoided discussing him, so eventually I stopped bringing it up. We welcomed Janet into the world 16 years ago, and she was our last child. Jamie encountered serious complications during her delivery, ultimately leading to a hysterectomy. This marked the end of our childbearing years, which was fine with both of us. Before the procedure, we went through the process of retrieving and preserving some of Jamie's eggs, but we allowed them to expire without taking any action. Janet was enough for us, and besides, at the time we made the decision, our marriage wasn't particularly strong. Jamie's parents resided in Cleveland, and our family used to make biannual visits to them. Occasionally, Jamie would go alone, or with Jan, but it had been over a year since Janet or I had visited. Jamie had gone to see her parents shortly after losing her job. Unfortunately, her mood deteriorated rather than improving, prompting her to express a desire to stay with her mother for a while. I agreed, thinking some time apart might help. While I missed her dearly within days, she extended her stay from the initially planned week to 10 days. With both my parents deceased and being an only child, John and Ruth, Jamie's parents, were my sole family. My relationship with her mother was strained, and Jamie seemed closer to her than to her father, causing tension. However, I developed a bond with her father, and we stayed in touch through phone calls and emails, although even that had diminished over the past 2 years, likely due to her mother's disapproval of me. Despite the strained relationship with her mother, I never harbored any resentment towards Jamie's visits with her parents. This visit wasn't ordinary. It came after nearly a year of tense relations between us, which worsened after her last visit. Jamie had been distant and irritable since she returned, constantly making demands of me and expressing anger if I didn't comply immediately. Surprisingly, things escalated even further after her most recent trip home. Her behavior toward Jan was different, though. If I had recognized this earlier, perhaps I could have intervened. Instead, I stayed silent as she criticized me and then walked away. I allowed her to dictate our actions to avoid confrontation, even in front of Jan or when we were with friends. I knew people perceived me as weak and ineffectual, but I chose to maintain peace. It may have been a mistake, but it's too late to dwell on it now. Her approach to the trip was characteristic. After days of repeated phone calls, she ultimately decided to go, informing me afterward. She planned to spend 2 weeks away with no discussion or consideration for my plans, making it potentially challenging for me. Despite my requests for an explanation, she brushed them off, instructing me to handle it. However, she did inform Jan and spent time ensuring her comfort and any necessary arrangements. She left me a list of Jan's activities but provided no other details. Packing her bags the night before departure, she retired early and arranged her own transportation to the airport, indicating she didn't need my assistance. She didn't even bother saying goodbye. As for our bed life, it did not exist at all. We haven't been close for at least 2 years, and certainly not since she lost her job 18 months ago. I remember that it was at least 6 months, if not more, before her last trip home. Attempts to discuss this issue were rejected, and for all my attempts to flirt, she went into an empty room, leaving me disappointed and offended. The more I insisted, the more she resisted. In the end, I gave up. I considered various options, even told Jamie about some of them, but received a stern warning about the consequences of infidelity. When I started talking about a divorce due to mental abuse, she brushed it off, joking about the potential impact on my reputation if she revealed in court how she had kicked me out of bed. I was furious, asking why she stayed with me, despite her obvious hatred, lack of interest in bed, and desire for solitude. Her response was unexpected. Jamie burst into tears, sobbing for an extended period. Once composed, she confessed her love for me, expressing confusion about her own reactions due to stress. She pleaded for patience and promised to seek help. Her emotional pleas left me stunned, immobilized as she retreated to the spare room for the night. Despite her heartfelt words, the next morning she returned to her usual abusive demeanor, leaving me bewildered. Today marks a day and a half since she left. I've been contemplating our relationship for a while now, leaning towards the idea that filing for divorce might be my only recourse. Jan is mature enough to handle it, and truth be told, she might even be happier. She's expressed her disdain for the way her mother treated me countless times. Yet, I held on, hoping things would improve for her sake. Perhaps now I have no other viable option. I feel young enough to believe there's still life ahead of me, and I crave more than Jamie seems willing to offer. Letting her go might be the only solution. The dilemma lies in the fact that despite her flaws and the mistreatment, I still love her. I fear divorce would inflict more pain on me than on her. These thoughts occupied my mind as I carried boxes down from our bedroom to the recently completed storage area beneath the stairs. Jamie insisted I clear out our closet to make space downstairs, and I'm pleased to have found ample room. It feels like the right moment to relocate things, away from her incessant nagging. On my third trip down the stairs, I nearly reached the bottom when my foot slipped, causing me to drop the 2 boxes I was carrying. I watched them tumble as I grabbed the railing to steady myself. They hit the ground, splitting open and scattering their contents across the new carpet. Luckily, there were no liquids or powders in the boxes, so the damage seemed minimal. After retrieving 2 empty boxes, I began to repack the items. It was then that I stumbled upon a bundle of what appeared to be notes or letters, tied together with a blue ribbon. Intrigued, as I had never seen them before, I set them aside, assuming they might be love letters to Jan from one of her previous boyfriends. After completing 2 more trips to transport all the designated boxes downstairs, I stored them under the steps and closed the panel doors, feeling exhausted. As I regained my breath, I noticed the stack of letters and pulled them closer. Untying the ribbon, I retrieved the first one, addressed to my darling Jamie. Instantly, I was both intrigued and angered. I had never written such words to Jamie, neither during our marriage nor before. This was not my doing. My breath, which had just begun to steady, quickened once again, but this time it wasn't from exhaustion. As I unfolded the letter, I noticed the numerous folds it had undergone, as evidenced by the deep folds and the fact that the letter had almost fallen apart into 3 parts. Obviously, Jamie treasured this letter and reread it repeatedly. I took it carefully, absorbing the contents. Dear Jamie, my thoughts go back to our last night together. Your delicious lips are haunting me. You drove me to the brink of madness. Your warmth enveloped me. I can't get rid of the memories. Even when you go into your loveless marriage, I can't help but miss you. Why are you staying with him when you could be with me forever? You know my circumstances. I'm trapped in my own loveless marriage. I would divorce my unhappy wife immediately if only you would agree to become mine. You understand that. Please, my beloved Jamie, change your mind. Promise me you'll come back to me. With all my love, Walter. The shock I experienced paralyzed me for almost an hour before I could recover. I looked through the letter again, reread its contents several times, but the meaning remained unchanged. My wife cheated on me. The name Walter Matthews on the return address stood out. I hastily searched for the date and found that it was neatly indicated at the top of the letter. It was sent 3 days after my wife returned from her annual visit to her mother a year ago. Taking another letter from the stack, I read its contents and found a similar description of another meeting. This time it was about a meeting in the front seat of a car parked outside a club. I skimmed through the remaining letters and discovered they were all from the same trip. It appeared that she had met him halfway through her journey and decided to prolong her stay to be with him over the last weekend. It seemed Walter had attempted to persuade her to leave me, but she wasn't swayed, and I understood her reasoning well enough. She likely didn't want the hassle of starting anew on her own, and given her assertive nature, she probably insisted he divorce his wife before she'd consider leaving me. I couldn't help but wonder if her feelings for him extended beyond mere lust, the same lust she denied me. I watched as the last of the letters slipped from my grasp, allowing the gravity of her actions to sink in. Seated in the basement, I mulled over the situation. It was evident from the letters and her decision to keep them that she had indeed betrayed me. The timing, coinciding with her visit to her mother, was apparent from the dates on the letters. As I pondered these revelations, I questioned how she managed to obtain the letters without my knowledge. Returning to the pile, I sifted through until I found what I sought: a larger envelope with her mother's return address. Her mother had forwarded the letters. It became clear that her mother was complicit in her actions and aware of her affair. I wasn't surprised, not in the slightest. I took the bundle of letters upstairs and placed them on the table. My thoughts had been spinning, trying to decide my course of action. It became clear to me that my marriage had reached its end, relieving me from being the target of her anger and demands. Until now, I had been enduring her mistreatment, hoping she would remember our love as I did. But that hope was futile. She didn't love me. Her demeanor revealed her disdain for me and her indifference to my well-being. She was infatuated with someone else, too frightened to permanently leave me for him, especially considering he was also married. And was she certain he would leave his wife? That was a thought-provoking question. I pondered over various options, yet consistently returned to the realization that I couldn't remain with Jamie any longer. Her lack of love and ongoing contempt were unbearable. I knew I should wait and have a conversation with her, but I couldn't muster the patience for that. No, this was the end. I resolved that by tomorrow I would enlist one of the private investigators we had used before to uncover the truth. Until then, I would be mapping out a life without Jamie. Before proceeding, I had a few tasks to complete. First, I needed to secure all the letters from old Walt and store them safely. Those letters contained a clear confession of adultery by old Walter, and as a lawyer, I knew exactly how to leverage them. Although she would eventually notice their absence, there was no need to let Jamie know the extent of my knowledge just yet. Furthermore, I didn't want my impressionable daughter to stumble upon them and potentially emulate her mother's behavior. Once I ensured the letters were stowed away, I could finally relax and start strategizing. It wasn't until 3 days later, on a Thursday, that she phoned me. She had only called once in the past week while she was away, and that was to request a few items from the desk. I questioned why she didn't wait until she returned home, to which she retorted with one of her typical sarcastic remarks about my apparent lack of concern for her. I reluctantly agreed, still waiting for my private investigator's report before revealing anything. I had enlisted his services the day after discovering the letters, and he had already been on the case for a few days, yet I hadn't received any updates from him. During the call, she didn't say much, briefly inquiring about Jan's well-being before abruptly ending the conversation without any expressions of affection or endearment. Typical of her. That was the final call of that week and into the next, but I expected nothing more from her. Upon my request, the private investigator traveled to Cleveland to conduct inquiries into Walter's background, scouring through DMV and city tax records as well as any other relevant sources. As I entered my office that Friday, just before my confrontation with her, he was already there, waiting. Instructing my secretary not to disturb me, I shut the door and he began briefing me. "All right, Mr. Schwann. I believe I've gathered the information you sought. His name is Walter Matthews, aged 45, married to Marie Matthews. Surprisingly, he has 5 children, ranging from 21 to 12 years old, including a pair of twins. Over the weekend, he and your wife spent their time in a motel near the interstate, remaining there throughout the day and night. He's the proprietor of a car dealership, dedicating most of his daylight hours there. It appears he's quite successful, with a substantial residence in the suburbs, likely valued at over $500,000. The eldest child is pursuing graduate studies while the others reside at home with their mother, who is a homemaker and does not hold a job." He pushed a photograph towards me, which showed a tall, dark-haired, severely dressed, and rather attractive man. He wasn't very big, but rather thin. I glanced at the picture briefly before handing it back. "What else have you discovered?" "It is not necessary to mention the large debts, only the mortgage on his house totaling more than $200,000. His business records show ongoing tax payments and income statements, which average about $200,000 per year before taxes. Not bad at all. The rest is standard information. His contact details, the names and ages of his children and wife, copies of tax returns for the last 3 years, and a few comments from neighbors. He seems to be popular and doesn't cause any problems. Oh, and one more thing. You may find this interesting. It seems he regularly visits the local home for quick needs, including receipts for the last 5 visits. He's a regular there, visits at least once a week, sometimes more often. Madam confirms that he is a reliable customer and does not cause any problems. Obviously, he prefers younger girls. But they have all reached the age of majority, so there are no legal levers of influence." I suddenly had the thought, did he date girls of easy virtue last week or this week? That was when Jamie was present. He had a regular routine, every Tuesday afternoon. As I mentioned earlier, he spent the weekend with your wife at a nearby hotel, and the rest of the time, he was at home with his wife. He only went out once during the week, on Wednesday. He met your wife at a restaurant. They sat together, behaving affectionately, lots of physical contact, and then he left alone. Your wife drove back home and stayed there. I overheard their conversation, though. She was making plans to meet him again that weekend. I expressed gratitude for his efforts, received the file, and provided him with a voucher for his payment. As I leaned back, I read through the entire report to understand this man better. The only certainty I had was my desire for revenge. It was directed at him, without a doubt. Since Jamie was going to take care of my daughter, I had to leave her alone. Making her my ex-wife would have to suffice. On the Friday prior to her return, as I scribbled down some to-do notes, the phone interrupted my thoughts. Lost in my task, I instinctively picked up, blurting out, "Yes, hello?" "It's me." And that's a ridiculous way to answer the phone. "Where's Jan? I need to speak with her." I held the phone, stunned. Was this the woman who claimed to be my wife? For the first time, I grasped how she communicated with me. Brusque, dismissive, dripping with disdain and rage. Enough was enough. I had no interest in toying with her like a cat with a mouse. Despite my profession as a lawyer, adept at manipulating with words, I craved none of it. I wanted to inflict pain, to make her suffer, to share the anguish I felt upon reading those damning letters and hearing the reports of her trysts in motel rooms. "She's not available right now. Please try again later." I angrily slammed the phone down. Let her feel my contempt. Within moments, the phone rang again. I let it ring several times before begrudgingly answering, "Hello?" "What the hell were you thinking hanging up on me? How dare you?" Her voice dripped with fury. Good. At least she could feel something. I slammed the phone down again, chuckling to myself. Waiting, but this time the phone remained silent, so I returned to my tasks. Nearly 10 o'clock that evening, the phone rang again. Glancing at the caller ID, I saw it was Jamie. Curious to see her approach this time, I answered after a few rings with my usual, "Hello?" "Hi, Jim. It's Jamie. Are you feeling any better now? You seemed upset when I called earlier. I thought I'd give it some time." "I wasn't upset earlier, Jamie. I just didn't want to entertain your demands. Your constant disrespect angers me. That's all. What do you want?" There was a brief silence before she replied, "I'm sorry if it came off that way. I didn't mean to be disrespectful. I was just in a rush to talk to Jan. I apologize if it seemed demanding." "All right. What do you need, Jamie? Why are you calling? I already told you Jan isn't here. What part of that didn't you understand?" I remained calm now that she was being respectful. Or was she? "What do you mean, why am I calling? You're my husband and I wanted to chat, that's all. Why wouldn't I call when I'm away? Don't you miss me at all?" "Actually, Jamie, it's been rather peaceful since you've been away. No arguing, no demands, no disrespect. Jan is happy spending time with me and her friends, and I'm enjoying my hobbies without criticism. And when I go to bed, I have the whole bed to myself. It's not like I've been missing the intimacy, not for a couple of years now. So, no, I don't miss you, and it's been quite pleasant with you gone." Once more, the silence lingered. "Jamie, are you still there or have you finished?" "I'm here. I'm just taken aback by your tone." "Have you been drinking, Jim? You sound quite unlike yourself." "Not a drop, not even a beer. Just some coffee and a few crackers. Trying to watch my weight, you know." "Well, if I didn't know better, I'd think you're relieved I'm away. I had hoped you'd want me to return soon, but if you don't miss me, maybe I'll extend my stay." "Would you prefer that, Jim?" There it was, the Jamie I knew, mixing soft words with threats and sarcasm. Now she wanted to prolong her trip to be with her lover. She was steering the conversation as she pleased, coaxing me into agreeing to more time away. But this time I was going to take control. "Well, Jamie, why don't you and Walter extend your trip like last time you visited your mother? He must have missed your company and your affections quite a lot. So instead of rushing back to our loveless marriage, why not indulge Walter a bit more? Seems he's been enjoying your company much more than I have in the past couple of years." I angrily hung up the phone again, this time yanking the cord from the wall. I could hear the other phones in the bedroom and den ringing, but they were too distant to bother me. Retrieving my cell from my jacket pocket, I powered it off too. I wanted nothing to do with her at the moment, and her absence brought a sense of relief. I genuinely found solace in her silence. Reflecting on our conversation, the only positive takeaway was her suggestion to go out and get drunk. It sounded like a plan, one I could easily manage. Heading upstairs to change for the night, I groomed myself, dabbed on some aftershave, and scrutinized my reflection in the mirror. Not too shabby for someone my age. I remained in decent shape, thanks to regular workouts at the club I frequented for business. My appearance wasn't too bad either. My hair, though almost completely white, remained thick and worn long. And my stomach, while not perfect, was manageable, restrained by my belt. Not bad at all. I headed downstairs, checked my voicemail, and deleted all the messages from Jamie. I phoned Jan, who was at the sleepover, informing her I'd be out but to reach me on my cell if necessary. Though it would be off, I'd check for messages. She assured me she'd be fine and expressed her desire to stay until lunch the next day. I mentioned her mom's plan to extend her stay, which seemed to please her. We exchanged loving goodbyes. Just before leaving, I removed my wedding ring, stringing it and hanging it from the bathroom mirror. While I didn't anticipate Jamie rushing home to her lover anytime soon, I wanted this to be her welcome when she eventually returned. More importantly, I wanted no reminders of her while I was out tonight. Tonight was for me. After a brief reflection on happier times, I departed. I drove across town to a bar I hadn't visited in years. It was a singles hotspot known for its social scene. I knew the owner from a past legal case, and my victory secured me a lifetime supply of free drinks from Carmine. Tonight, I aimed to make good on that promise. Walking into the bustling establishment, I felt a surge of satisfaction at the warm welcome. Catching Carmine's eye, he flashed a victory sign and whispered to a woman at the bar. She promptly vacated her seat, gesturing theatrically for me to take it before departing. Well, look who's here. My main man, Jimbo. How've you been? What'll it be tonight? Hey, Carmine, been a while. How about you set me up with a good bottle and leave it here? I'm in the mood to drown some sorrows, and I know you're the man for the job. Don't you worry, Jimbo, you're in good hands. So spill the beans. What's eating at you? Damn woman's been cheating on me, Carmine. Found out today she's been seeing some guy in Cleveland for over a year. Her and her mother, they played me for a fool. Real pieces of work, those two. When in Rome, speak as the Romans do. Carmine was a straight shooter, no beating around the bush. He slid a bottle of top-shelf scotch my way, pouring the first glass. Pushing it towards me alongside a beer, he motioned for the other customers to wait, taking charge of the bar himself. As I recounted my woes, he listened, nodding knowingly. Rising to his feet, he offered, "You go ahead and drown those troubles. If you need anything, just give me a shout, you hear? For now, drink up. I've got your back." With that, he stepped away, leaving me to sip my scotch. For a while, I'd been steadily sipping my drink when I suddenly realized there was someone seated beside me, their hand casually brushing against my thigh. Glancing up, I saw a woman close by, one hand holding her drink while the other gently caressed my leg where it rested against the stool. Taking in her appearance, I noted her striking blonde hair and captivating blue eyes, framed by a face that held both beauty and maturity, perhaps around 45 or even 50 years old. This was a woman of substance, not a young girl. There was character and intelligence in her features. "Hello there. And who might you be?" I replied, always ready with a witty remark, a trait common among us lawyers. "Hello to you too. I'm Rachel. Rachel English. And you are?" she responded. "Jim. My name's Jim. And may I say, Rachel, you're quite stunning." Her smile was worth more than any compliment. I wanted to keep that smile on her face, so I searched my mind for more words. "What's a beautiful woman like you doing alone in a place like this? I find it hard to believe you need to come here to find company. Any man would be lucky to be seen with you." I was greeted by a wide smile, which suddenly faded, replaced by a sorrow that couldn't mar her beautiful face. though it did weigh heavy on me. I wished to alleviate it. "Why the sadness? You shouldn't be sad," I said, glancing at her hand, still resting on my thigh, and noticed the wedding ring. "Is your husband cheating on you, like my wife?" "No, far from it. My husband was killed in Iraq. He was a colonel, and his convoy was ambushed. He died along with most of his men. It happened 2 years ago. I miss him terribly," she said, bowing her head briefly. When she looked up again, her eyes were clear. They say time heals all wounds. For her sake, I hoped it was true. We talked some more, and after nearly 2 hours, we left together. I was too drunk to drive, but she wasn't. We ended up at her place, and though I would have liked to boast about how long I made love to her, I think I passed out. The last thing I remembered was her removing my pants, and though I was intrigued by the possibilities, apparently, I lacked the stamina. The next morning, I woke up in an unfamiliar bed, feeling disoriented and lonely. It took me a while to remember where I was until I noticed the amazing woman I saw last night, gracefully holding a tray with coffee and 2 cups. Dressed in an elegant robe, she instantly caught my attention. When she put the tray on the table, I had to forget about the coffee, and my attention completely turned to her. She readily responded, and we started kissing. It was a pleasant intimacy. We nestled close to each other, both feeling a bit awkward. I was relieved she came over, as it put us on equal footing. I glanced at her and noticed her smiling at me. "Well, wasn't that something special? It's like being back in high school," she said, nearly laughing at my expression. "Yeah, that's exactly how it felt. Nice to know I'm not the only one who found it easy," I replied. She got up to use the bathroom, catching my attention. She returned. I smiled back at her, once again struck by her beauty. "Now let's explore further," she suggested. After about 20 minutes, we lay down next to each other. It was incredible. "How can I express my gratitude?" She beamed. "I believe you just did it." I was pleased. "You are an amazing woman." Turning to her, I couldn't resist asking, "Do you often visit the Carmine?" "I'll tell you the truth, but please let me finish before you answer. Can you promise?" "I promise." "Go on." "Carmine called me and asked me to come. He's my brother. He said that there is a good person who needs help, and that's why I'm here." "When I arrived, you were already pretty drunk. But the more we talked, the more I was attracted to you. I wanted to feel something again, especially after my husband's death. That's why I invited you to my bed. I wanted someone to make love to me for the first time after his death. You were such a person, and it exceeded all my expectations." I was silent, looking into her deep blue eyes. She was telling the truth, and I could understand it. Her actions were motivated by sincere desire, not pity or kindness. I supported her as much as she supported me. I expressed this opinion and much more during our conversation. I was interested in learning more about her, and we agreed to keep in touch. Despite understanding my circumstances and realizing that I would be busy for some time, she offered me her shoulder to cry on, or her bed to share with me when I needed it, of course, with her. I grinned, but sincerely accepted her offer. We made love one more time before I got dressed and went home. Arriving home just after noon, Rachel had driven me back to retrieve my car from Carmine's bar. The place appeared deserted, and upon entering, I confirmed it. I wasn't surprised that Jamie hadn't hurried home in an attempt to salvage our failing marriage, but I felt a twinge of disappointment. I had expected 19 years to hold more significance for her. Apparently not. I headed to the kitchen to make myself some coffee when I noticed the blinking light on the answering machine. I reviewed the log and observed 10 calls, all originating from Jamie's cell phone. There was an additional call, this one from a number I recognized as Jamie's father's. We conversed frequently enough for me to recall his number. That call intrigued me enough to listen to. Jim, it's Paul. When you receive this, please give me a ring. I persuaded Jamie and her mother to spend a few days at the cabin. Jamie initially wanted to return home immediately, but I convinced her otherwise. They both need some time to reflect, for reasons you might surmise. So, reach out to me on this number, it's my cell. Take care. Fascinating. I intended to return his call when I was prepared. Meanwhile, I listened to several voicemails from Jamie, all consisting of variations of berating me for not understanding and generally belittling me once again. The last two were less confrontational and more desperate, but none left an impact on me. I deleted them all. I checked if Jan was home, but there was no indication of her presence. She did mention sometime after noon. Suddenly feeling hunger, I made myself a sandwich and grabbed a cold beer to settle my stomach and alleviate the hangover. As I ate slowly, my thoughts drifted to the morning spent with Rachel, instantly lifting my spirits. After finishing my meal, I took the phone to the family room and dialed Paul. "Hi, Paul, it's Jim returning your call." "Jim, I'm glad you called. I'm aware of the situation, which is why I reached out. I've sent Jamie and her mother to the cabin to keep them away from here. I'm livid with both of them, and you understand why. Well, all I know is that Jamie has been seeing a guy named Walter Matthews. It seems to have started during her last visit to the cabin, or maybe even earlier. And just so you know, I suspect Ruth was aware of it too, considering she's the one who forwarded his love letters to Jamie. That's the extent of what I know, Paul. Indeed, that's the crux of it. I discovered from overhearing a conversation between her and her mother that she planned to spend a weekend with him. That's why she called you, to explain she'd be extending her stay. I was furious with Jamie, but all she did was cry when I confronted her. She's been in tears since your call last night, desperate to reach you. Her mother was insufferable, filling her head with toxic notions that you weren't worthy of her, that she was wise to move on. That sort of nonsense. I struck her across the face, the first time I've ever laid a hand on her in our marriage. It sickened me. But honestly, Jim, she brought it upon herself. As Paul recounted this, his pain was palpable, yet I couldn't shake my anger over Ruth's actions. While she played a role in wrecking our marriage, she likely saw it as justified. It was a shame I didn't foresee it, a shame Jamie succumbed so easily to betrayal. It shouldn't have been so effortless, no matter how much her mother influenced her. Paul mentioned he'd visit them later tonight and advised me to await his call. He offered to let me speak with Jamie, but I declined. I had nothing to say to her at the moment, perhaps ever again. I needed time to consider. Paul understood, and we ended the call. Jan arrived about an hour later, and instead of beating around the bush, I laid out what I knew about her mother. It wasn't to be cruel, but rather to be honest. Jan was maturing quickly and had witnessed the turmoil in our marriage. She was caught in the middle, and I wanted her to understand what lay ahead. She had choices to make, and I wanted her to be prepared. If the marriage dissolved, she was old enough to decide where she wanted to be. We went over the advantages and disadvantages, and she grasped that it was not a decision driven by emotions but by practicality. Being nearly an adult, she needed to prioritize what was best for her present and future. We had lengthy discussions, and I felt proud witnessing her understanding and composure throughout. Eventually, we mutually agreed that it was in her best interest to stay at home with her mother. Managing school and appointments would require someone readily available, which I couldn't guarantee. However, I assured her that I would always ensure her well-being, and education remained intact. As it approached 5 o'clock, the phone rang. Jan answered, and I overheard her exclaim, "Mom, how could you?" Deciding to let her converse with her mother first, I stepped outside onto the porch. It pained me to see her confronted with such a situation, but she needed to be involved as it impacted her life directly. As I contemplated my approach, she handed me the phone. "Dad, here's the phone. I don't want to speak to her again," she said, tears welling up in her eyes as she handed me the device. I wished to console her, but she hurried away, leaving me alone, mirroring my previous actions towards her. I watched her departure, in no rush to engage with Jamie. "Hello, Jamie," I greeted, my tone curt. I was already drained from the ordeal. Though it had only been about 24 hours, it felt like weeks or even months of turmoil. "Why did you tell Jan? Why were you so cruel? Just to hurt me? Just to spite me?" Jamie reverted to her old self swiftly, resorting to lashing out. Refusing to accept blame seemed to be her creed. Well, I had had enough. "Go to hell, you cheating betrayer. Call me when you can speak civilly. Otherwise, don't bother contacting me or returning here. Goodbye." I disconnected and held the phone loosely, waiting to see her next move. It didn't take long. The phone rang. "Hello," I answered, my voice drained of energy, reflecting how I felt. "Jim, I'm sorry. I was just upset that you told Jan about what I did. I don't understand why you did that. It's because you hate me now, isn't it?" Jamie's voice sounded apologetic, but with a hint of self-pity. "Actually, Jamie, not everything revolves around you. You may not believe me, but why I told her had nothing to do with you. However, what you did will impact her life as well as mine, so I felt she deserved the respect you've denied me all this time. I informed her to allow her time to come to terms with it. That's why." After a moment of silence, she pondered. Then she softly asked, "Jim, do you despise me?" "No, I don't despise you. Honestly, I feel very little when I think of you. The past 2 years have nearly extinguished all the love I once had for you. I suppose there's some anger when I think of you and him, but I'll move past it. You've succeeded in erasing whatever remnants of us were inside me. Would you believe me if I said I'm sorry? If I wished it never happened? I deeply regret letting it happen. You didn't deserve this. I'm truly sorry, Jim." "Well, Jamie, as I've said, there's just an emptiness inside me where thoughts of you used to reside. You asked if I missed you the other night. The answer increasingly leans toward no. And you're correct. It should never have occurred. That's what our marriage vows were about, our pledges to each other, remember them. Forsaking all others. You violated those vows, and now I must come to terms with the absence. Please don't mean that, Jim. Please don't feel that way. I'll come home as soon as I can, and we can resolve this. I know I've committed a grave error, but I'll make amends if you just give me the opportunity." "I'm unsure, Jamie. I'm really unsure now. I'd rather you stayed away a bit longer. These recent days have been peaceful for me. I'm managing fine without you, and Janet and I need to figure out her future. She'll decide on her own, and I won't sway her. Perhaps she should stay with you if she can. She only has about a year and a few months left. Jim, it sounds like you're suggesting it's over between us. Please don't decide anything until we can talk. I know I messed up badly, but I can make it right if you give me a chance. Jim, I realize now that I love you more than I thought. I forgot for a while, but now I remember why. I don't want to lose you. Please wait for me, Jim. Wait until I'm home. I have to go, Jamie. Goodbye." I ended the call swiftly, tears welling up as I heard her pleading. It was just a reminder of the love I had for Jamie before she hurt me. That love would fade fast, but for now I had to endure the pain of separation. The phone started ringing almost immediately after I ended the previous call. Glancing at the caller ID, I saw it was Jamie and chose to ignore it. My conversation with her was over. The depth of her betrayal was becoming increasingly apparent. Around noon, the following Wednesday, my secretary informed me of a call from my wife. It had been 2 days since I'd made it clear I wouldn't be taking calls from Jamie, so this was unexpected. When I asked why she accepted the call, she mentioned it was forwarded by Margaret Wilson. Margaret. Damn. I had forgotten Jamie and Margaret were friends. Margaret was notoriously difficult and had few acquaintances, yet she and Jamie got along famously. I always questioned why, but now it was starting to make sense. They were cut from the same cloth. Margaret had been through 4 divorces already, the perfect role model for my soon-to-be ex. All right, I'll accept it. It's not your fault, Susie. Thank you, I said as I pressed the button for line 1. Yes? What is it? And it had better be important, Margaret. I won't forget this betrayal, I responded, recognizing Margaret's voice from the caller ID. Whoa, Jim. I had no clue there were issues, but what are you doing, you jerk? You won't even talk to your wife? She'll be on after I hang up. Speak to her. Hello, Jamie. How can I assist you? I maintained a serious and calm tone. Can you come home and talk to me? I'm at home, Jim. Please, can we talk? Jamie pleaded. Whose home is it? Jamie. Walter Matthews' home. Certainly not ours. You've ruined that, haven't you? I heard her stifled sobs indicating she had opted for a more tactful and pleading approach. Jim, please come home and talk to me. I owe you an explanation, and I promise to give it to you without lies or excuses. Please, Jim, come home. What do you really want, Jamie? Just to be looked after while you do whatever you want behind my back? Isn't that what you've been doing for the last 2 years? You treat me badly, reject intimacy, and make my life unbearable. And then you wanted him and slept with him a year ago when you said you were visiting your mother. You did the same thing this time. You planned to spend the weekend with him again, just like last time. And you were going to humiliate me until I agreed to let you stay longer. You tried to manipulate me to justify your infidelity. Was the intimacy as good? Was he better? And the fact that you let him do things where you refused me, then he must be something special. I was really exaggerating. The anger that had been simmering all this time needed an outlet, and now that she was here, she was the center of attention. Please, Jim. Maybe I deserve it, but you're wrong. You're wrong about Walter and me. I didn't even see him during this trip, I swear. Don't feed me that, Jamie. You spent the whole damn weekend with him at the Dorchester Hotel. What about Wednesday? Does our dinner not count? Where did you two make plans for the upcoming weekend? You even mentioned that you persuaded your ignorant husband to extend your stay here, to sit next to her, to touch her, and who knows what else might be. Or is it considered that you only see him when you sleep with him? How did you... I just met him briefly to get it over with. To make it clear that I never want to see him again, I swear, Jim. I didn't go anywhere with him. That was the only time I saw him. Another lie, Jamie. I know the truth. What about the last trip? Didn't you meet him in the parking lot? Didn't you sleep with him? Do you deny any of this? Silence. The truth hit her hard. Finally, at least some justice has been served. Did you and Walter talk about his 5 children? What about his twins? Did he mention them? And his wife, Margaret. Have you talked to her? Have you told him about me? Were you laughing at our ignorant spouses? Were you joking about how you cheated on them? The scream on the other end of the line caught me off guard. I moved the phone away from my ear, but I heard a click, which meant that we were disconnected. I hung up, feeling drained like a wrung-out rag. Limp. I faced a decision. Either I could return home and confront Jamie, allowing her the chance to explain her actions, or I could take immediate steps to dissolve our marriage, fueled by the pain and anger consuming me. I opted for the latter. I enlisted the help of 2 adept associates, specializing in divorce proceedings, and briefed them on my circumstances. Viewing it as a case made the process surprisingly manageable, drawing on my 2 decades of professional experience. Though my involvement made this case unique, they swiftly focused on the task at hand. My initial priority was to file a lawsuit in Ohio for alienation of affections, a rare but valid legal recourse. While I anticipated the likelihood of defeat, monetary concerns held no sway. My objective was to hold him accountable for his infidelity in court, regardless of the outcome. I harbored no desire for financial compensation. Rather, I aimed for his wife and children to be aware of his actions. While I understood the potential hurt this might cause his wife, she deserved to know the truth about her husband's character, empowering her to make informed decisions regarding their relationship. I handed over the letters to one of my trusted associates and instructed him to draft a motion for a handwriting analysis and confirmation that they originated from Mr. Walter Matthews. As he glanced through the top letter, he grinned and securely stowed them in his briefcase. He planned to fly to Cleveland the following day to initiate the necessary proceedings. Meanwhile, the other gentleman and I devised a series of actions aimed at closing accounts, transferring funds to alternate accounts, arranging for an external audit of my assets, and obtaining estimates of their value. We strategized on how to reposition certain assets prior to the audit to safeguard key holdings. I executed a power of attorney and observed as he commenced the process. I relied on their aggressive approach to ensure maximum repercussions for our adversaries while minimizing my losses. By day's end, events were unfolding rapidly and I was ready to return home. It was time to initiate the process of separating from Jamie. Though she instigated it, I was determined to see it through. As I made my way down the corridor toward my car, it struck me that when love transforms into hatred, the resulting pain knows no bounds. I entered the house and found Jamie and Janet seated on the couch in the family room. It was evident that Janet had been crying, and Jamie didn't look much better. They both turned their attention to me as I stepped into the room. Janet rushed towards me, wrapping her arms around me in an embrace. In a hushed voice, she whispered in my ear, "Good luck, Dad. But whatever happens, I love you." As I watched her walk away, her demeanor was composed, belying the pain she must have been feeling. She was a resilient girl with a strong will. She would be okay, no matter what unfolded. She was nothing like her mother, and that thought brought me some solace. With a sigh, I took a seat in one of the chairs Jamie had purchased during her couples mode phase, matching chairs and couch, both of which I detested. "Well, Jamie, I'm here. You wanted to talk to me, explain why you've disrupted our lives, why you've betrayed Janet and me." "I don't know. I know that's not an excuse, but it's the truth. I just don't understand why I did it. When I first went home, I only wanted to escape everything. I never intended to do anything except get away. And for the first week, that's all I did. Then Mom introduced me to this man. She said he was a friend from church and that he was in a troubled marriage, asking if I could talk to him." Jamie appeared remarkably composed now, and I couldn't help but wonder what she hoped to achieve by explaining herself. Despite myself, I was intrigued. That Friday evening, on the eve of my scheduled flight home, we went out for dinner. We talked. He radiated charm and showered me with compliments. During the conversation, he touched my hand lightly, occasionally brushing a lock of hair from my face. His courteous manner won me over, and I found myself attracted to him in a way I hadn't felt in a long time, even compared to my feelings for you. Looking back, I realize how terribly wrong it was, but by the end of the evening, I couldn't help myself. Our physical intimacy did not exist for several months before my departure. However, that night spent with him, everything went back to normal. He noticed this and suggested looking for a motel. We spent the whole night together. The next day, I called you and told you that I was going to extend my stay for another couple of days. I spent them with Walter at the motel. As she talked about it, anger began to boil in me, reaching almost blinding intensity by the time she finished. The pain of her betrayal was so acute that I felt sick. However, I didn't want to give her the pleasure of seeing me lose control. Instead, I stayed sitting, pretending to be calm, and listened. I restrained myself as much as I could, so as not to do anything stupid. I returned home without mentioning anything about Walter. I didn't contact him, speak to him, or write to him afterward. I attempted to erase what had happened from my mind. Furthermore, I refrained from seeking intimacy with you because I feared you would sense my infidelity. I couldn't take that risk. Despite what you may think, I genuinely love you. and the shame of my actions weighs heavily on me to the point where I feel I might perish." She paused, tears streaming down her face as she hung her head in disgrace. While I sensed her genuine shame, I couldn't bring myself to believe anything else she said. Not her love for me, the motives behind her betrayal, or her fear of my discovery. None of it resonated with me. "Well, Jamie, that's quite the tale. But why do I find it utterly unbelievable? Let me explain. Firstly, you had already shut me out long before you departed, treating me poorly even then. Secondly, I am aware of certain acts you engaged in with him, acts you never entertained with me. Why the discrepancy? And you were planning to repeat it. I had you looked into, and I know you met with him the first weekend and spent it with him. I'm also aware that Wednesday night you arranged to spend another weekend with him." I was breathing heavily now, my chest rising and falling rapidly, fists clenched so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. I knew she could see the rage in my eyes, but I wasn't finished yet. "For nearly 2 years, you withheld both your body and your heart from me. Your love and affection were denied for even longer. What compounded the pain was seeing you lavish those affections on someone else. You explored realms with him that were off limits with me. Acts you deemed too taboo, you readily embraced with him. Your betrayal extended beyond mere physical intimacy. It stripped me of my rights as your spouse, transferring them to another. This scheme, orchestrated between you and your mother, was no accident. While I knew she harbored no fondness for me, I failed to comprehend her animosity towards his wife and children. She must have foreseen the potential fallout, the ruination of their marriage. Yet she proceeded without regard for the consequences, indifferent to the sanctity of either union. Her long-standing disdain for me guided you both down this path of betrayal, with scarcely a protest from your end. Jamie, your betrayal unfolded effortlessly, a stark indication of the decay in our marriage. It shouldn't have been so effortless. That realization, more than anything, convinced me that our love had withered away. You merely acknowledged it before I did, leaving me to confront this painful truth alone." Jamie leapt to her feet and closed the gap between us, extending her arms as if to embrace or restrain me. I rejected her advances, pushing her arms away and stepping back. "Keep your distance. I want nothing to do with you. Just let me be." "Jim, please." "You don't mean that." "No. I refuse to stay away. I love you and I won't give up on us." "It's not up to you anymore, Jamie. You forfeited that choice when you went to that motel room with Walter Matthews. You sealed our fate when you spent that weekend with him and planned to do it again this time. There's no love left in my heart for you. You've destroyed it with your betrayal." Jamie sank to the floor, hands cradling her head as she absorbed my words, realizing that her role as my wife was coming to an end. She would always be Jamie Parker, but she'd never again be Jamie Schwann, my wife. That chapter was closed, and I had already initiated the process of reclaiming my name. What she didn't know yet was how I intended to deal with her lover. I had intended to leave the house before this, but things didn't go as planned. "I'll sleep in the spare room until I find a new place. We'll try to avoid each other to spare ourselves any further embarrassment. Janet knows everything, so she'll understand." Jamie appeared disengaged, so I headed upstairs to transfer my belongings to the spare room. Most of my packing would come later, but I required a few items immediately. Upon entering the bathroom for my supplies, I noticed the ring still hanging where I had left it. I glanced at it briefly before moving on, opting to leave it be. A few days later, I sat in the den, diligently working on papers that needed urgent attention, when the phone interrupted my focus. Unsure if Jamie was present, I reached for it, coincidentally grabbing it at the same time as Jamie. To my surprise, it was Walter Matthews on the line. I hadn't anticipated his call. I muffled the receiver and listened in. "Jamie, it's Walter. What's happening?" "Walter, I explicitly told you not to contact me here. and I made it clear I wanted nothing to do with you. So, why are you calling? Rubbish. Do you know your husband has filed a lawsuit against me? He served me papers here in Cleveland in front of my family. He's even subpoenaed my wife. He's suing me for $1 million. He's what? Oh my God, I suspected he found out, but I never imagined he'd take it this far. There was a stifled laugh before Jamie continued. I'm sorry, Walter, but there's nothing I can do. Looks like you'll have to come clean with your wife now, won't you? Your broken marriage is about to become even more shattered. You deceitful liar. After all the lies you fed me about your crumbling marriage, your despised wife, and your imminent divorce, you deserve this. So go to hell, you lying scoundrel. She forcefully hung up the phone while he continued to shout. I listened until he finally gave up, then set down my receiver. It seemed like Walter and Ruth concocted a scheme and successfully sold it to Jamie, who naively fell for it completely. It's a shame. She was too easily swayed by both her mother and her lover, too quick to turn her back on our marriage. That was the issue. She was too compliant. Just then, Jamie walked in, her face bearing a sorrowful expression. She spoke, her voice heavy with accusation. You planned all this, didn't you? You were just waiting for everything to fall into place so you could meet me face to face. We've been married for almost 20 years, and I can't believe I forgot your motto. Cause maximum pain and let it last forever. With Walter, you strive for the maximum. What about me? What have you prepared for me? For you? Nothing, Jamie. I realized that I despised what Walter had done to me. Even if you're partly to blame. He knew that wasn't the case. He has a wife and 5 children, and he's cheating on her with my own wife. He'll pay as much as I can get him to. And I offered to cover Margaret's divorce costs if she decides to leave him. Maybe if you play your cards right, you can marry him when she kicks him out. You know that's not true. I don't love him. I don't like him even now. He lied to me about everything. Both he and my mother. I hate her, and I hate him. She gave me that familiar look that she always used to manipulate situations to her advantage. Can't you find the strength to forgive me and give me a chance to fix everything? I promise I will never make that mistake again. Please, Jim, let me fix this. I'm sorry, Jamie. You had the opportunity, and you made the decision. As I said before, it was too easy for you to leave me. Too easy. You made your choice, and it was wrong. I put down my work, turned off the desk lamp, and got up from my chair. She noticed my outfit, a suit, tie, and polished shoes. I was dressed for an evening walk, and she noticed it. Don't wait for me. I have plans for the evening, and I may not be back until morning. I had a date with Rachel English tonight. When I asked why, she jokingly told me to take my pajamas, saying that it might be fun to wake up together. As I was leaving the house, I looked back and saw Jamie standing in the doorway with tears in her eyes. The consequences will not be long in coming.